Yes. So I'm sharing this information on copyright. My friend goes, AI is a vampire. It lives forever, it consumes everything in its way, and that's the source of its immortality. I said, that's not the first time that a human inspiration, a creation that came out of that, has scared the heck out of everybody.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I'm Declan Dunn, and this is the AI Optimist. An AI as vampire might be an interesting angle, but the commonalities between the story of the vampire and the way AI is being perceived shows us so much about how we can figure out who owns what comes out of AI, but also understand the core root of our fear of AI, which, like the vampire, is rooted in our deep, instinctual human fears. Now, in the hunger for data, ownership, especially with AI, becomes so important, and we can't unwind it. We can't go backwards. It's in there. So ownership now means that these companies own it as sort of changed content that they've learned from. But it's not there as the content that went in, as you remember. So as we deal with ownership, we have to deal with the transformative nature of what's going on here. What Joseph Campbell, the famous mythologist, would have called the shadow self. And in that, maybe those things that scare us so much are there to help us discover something new. So who owns what digital vampires consume? Let's find out by going back to the coldest winter in Europe, maybe ever, 1816, in a place called Villa Diodati in Switzerland. Like back in 1819, a character was born twice, the vampire. First as a character in a story that was written in 1816. I'll talk to you about that later because this really applies to AI. The story was The Vampyre, Pyre, the first aristocratic vampire in English literature history that led to Dracula and all the vampires you see today. So in the coldest winter of Europe, up in this mansion, lies Lord Byron, a very famous poet and celebrity, very famous. Percy Shelley, who's an author and also famous, Dr. John Polidori, who is Byron's doctor, and a woman named Mary Godwin, later to become Mary Shelley and the author of Frankenstein. Well, guess where that began? Right in the Villa Diodati, where the vampire began as well. See, they were all stuck inside. Think of this like the pandemic of 1816, except because of a volcano that blew up in Indonesia, we know they didn't. The whole world was blanketed in ash and it got really, really cold that summer. So what did they do? They sat inside and got bored of telling German horror stories which they were reading to each other. Remember, nothing else but books. But these three creative people, prompted by Lord Byron, started into a contest to create a horror story. Consider it like instead of binging horror stories, you're creating horror stories to share with people. So Mary Shelley, Godwin, went and created Frankenstein. Polidori took a fragment that Byron had created and then just gave up and turned it into the story of the vampire. They all enjoyed it, walked away. Mary Shelley later became famous. But at the same time, in 1819, this is where it becomes like AI. So they published it. But at this time in 1819, Byron had been out of England because of debts and drama in his life, divorce, so much going on. He literally fled the country and never to return. So a publisher, Henry Colborne, inside the UK, published the book The Vampyre, Pyre, under the name of Lord Byron. Because with Lord Byron's name, and the fact that Lord Byron was nowhere around, and this is way old time, so it's not like we have that instant media fix, right? He published it in a magazine and as a book, and things went really, really well for him. Now, when Byron found out about this and Polidori found out about this, they got really upset, but what were they going to do? It had already left, and in the end, they did get attributed and the story was figured out. But that's what put the vampire idea into people's heads. And that's what got it to be 78 years later an inspiration for a man named Bram Stoker writing a book called Dracula.
Yes.
Sound familiar? Because it's sort of like we're seeing today with AI, where it's taking all the work without asking for permission, publishing it, not literally, not the same way that this publisher did by copying it, but still taking original creative work and turning it into something else without consent. So, what does this all mean for AI? In a way, AI has so much in common to creators because they feel like their story has been stolen. Now, not like Polidori and Byron, it wasn't published exactly as it is, but the theme is still there. If somebody takes something from you, that's where the vampire theme came to my friend, and it makes such sense. You feel like this thing you don't understand, you don't see, is taking away what you have. And what's interesting is it started with a prompt, one by Lord Byron. That little fragment was basically the prompt. Polidori was like the AI creating the output, the book. And then the publisher was the one who took it and almost published it without giving credit to either of those two. And that was later cleared up. But here's the key with AI. 78 years later, when Bram Stoker picks up The Vampire, gets inspired and writes what's become even better book, Dracula, he starts the whole genre that leads up to what we've seen in the Twilight series and True Blood. That whole thing built on that inherent fear that Joseph Campbell, the mythologist, again would call our shadow self, projected onto reality. That is a lot of what's going on with AI. Now, let me get you on game here to make sure that you're tracking with me. I'm not saying they're the same, but if Bram Stoker had said, "Oh, I was successful with Dracula, published it, I want to thank the people who created it," he would have been paying the publisher. That's who would have had the copyright, who had stolen it. And that's what they're equating with AI in their minds, their perception. I'm not saying it's like that, but if you understand the theme of the vampire and where it comes from, a deep human fear, you start understanding there's more to this story than just someone stealing and publishing a work and making some money off of it. It's taking it without consent or permission, and that's even harder to handle often than the financial impact for somebody who wrote it, created it, and spent the time. See, what AI and vampires have in common is an enormous hunger for data. They can't get enough, and there's not enough to feed them in the world. Well, maybe vampires have enough people. They don't need that much blood. But the comparison is still there. The vampire takes without asking. Vampires need blood. AI needs data. So is training, AI training, is that like feeding or is that like learning? That line that we're drawing in the sand for copyright is so key because if it's feeding like a vampire, then it's not really giving back to the society it's taking from. And if it's learning, that's where copyright law should not apply, at least according to Japan. Some other countries, the US, not so much, but we're in the early days of figuring out what copyright law is in every country. And is that inability to say AI is learning and just knee jerk reaction and say it's feeding on what we have a way to stop it or a normal human impulse to things like vampires? Vampires, not real. AI is real, even though we really can't see what it is. So it made me wonder, has there been an artist who was caught using AI to their advantage? Because we know a lot of people have been caught copying and things like that. Has somebody actually gone out there? And I found a story about this Chinese digital artist named Yuumei. And in 2024 at the Anime Expo, that's what Yuumei's specialty is, these really brilliant, bright colors, really soft images, just very unique. If you're watching the video, you can see them. So she is at this and somebody purchases a piece of her work. This is how she makes a living. And they look at it and they say, this was AI generated. And of course, there's becomes this big social media arguments, standing up, saying stuff back and forth, claiming that this famous digital artist was using AI or not. And it turns out that she, when things were figured out, had traced a competitor or a collaborator in art called Ask and did it so close to what Ask's image was that that was called over-referencing. She returned the money. Game was over. But it wasn't AI. But think about what that vampire-like fear just did to somebody. Here's somebody well-known, very successful. You have to respect her work when you take a look at it. This is good stuff. And they accuse her of AI because AI becomes that fear. I'm being cheated. Do you see where that like amplifies? And everything we look at now, we wonder, is that real? And that could actually be for all the people pushing critical thinking with AI, it might be one of the best outcomes. People actually question what they see. But to you listening, is it really that simple? Are we just having to question everything? Yes is the answer, but isn't it funny how the more famous you become, the more likely we'll accuse you of using AI? And why is accusing someone of AI like accusing them of doing something wrong? Okay, in this case, it was an artist who's selling a piece of work. If it was AI generated, that would be a false representation. But what was really happening was it was a false accusation driven by the fact that we all wonder, is it AI or is it human? And I'm going to tell you, I think that's where the real ending of this happens when we start realizing it's not an either or world, it's human and AI. So here's the AI copyright paradox, in the US at least. All the data that's been taken in, how are you going to get it out? What sort of money? It pales to any other challenge we have is if this happens and say, we have to say okay to put copyrightable content in, all those billions of contributors of articles, images, music, all have to be notified. It's not only not realistic, it's sort of sad. And I want AI engineers to understand why creators feel this way. It was a drive-by to them. It was not something that they were said they had a say in. It was something that just happened to them. It's human in the data and the people that created it. It's human in the thoughts and stories and processes and code that was done by generations of people. The US copyright law states really clearly that you have to have three things to get a copyright. It has to be in some tangible form, right? It has to be something. It has to be an original work, and it has to be created by a human. See, like vampires can't enter your house in the story unless you invite them in, AI can't get a copyright unless you can prove that there's a human involved. And in this mix of AI and immortality is one of the challenges because unlike the creative works that even Lord Byron idea being stolen, it's still out there in tangible form. We can still do something because that's what was taken. But when AI takes something in and transforms it, it doesn't transform it into another document necessarily, or it might. It really doesn't have an exact output, and it's not built to output what was put into it. It's not a copy machine. So if we apply the copyright rules, let's go back to the vampire story. So Bram Stoker is inspired by it. Should Bram Stoker have paid the original writer of the vampire that he assumedly paid for or took out at a library and read and turned into his better story of Dracula? Should he have gone back to Byron or the original author? Or was that 80 years later? And to question engineers ask me all the time in AI, why are copyrights so long? Because they were built in a time where things move slowly and the ownership was supposed to be longer. Remember, ownership is what drives this all. See, the people using ChatGPT to write term papers, they're not really interested in whether it's copyright approved. They just want to know it's from Shakespeare and they can take some things. And they don't know what went into it. They're just taking it from the AI because it's amazing and no one knows what's inside there really. So when does AI stop being a fancy copying machine and into some form of intelligence that we can deal with. And who gets to decide that? Because right now, AI is treated almost like a vampire, guilty until proven human. And ownership is only to humans. And also the fact that when you put something in, there has to be some protection. Because this idea we have right now is more of convenience than reality. As this goes through, you see the lawsuits being settled. Let's face it, there's no way major Hollywood studios are going to let you and me take their AI generated script and sell it as our own. And that's where copyright will trickle down to us. But I don't want it to trickle down. Just like Yuumei, that ownership question comes to where you might challenge the integrity of an artist. And even if that work might have been similar to another person's, and kudos to her for just turning it around saying, done deal. The fact is, inspirations come through artists, through music all the time, in ways that we're not even conscious of. So we're pretending like we're all aware, where most artists will tell you, I don't even know where it came from. It came from a process, an experience. And that is the randomness and probability that also drives AI. I know it's different, but we mimic ourselves. And this is part of what we mimic. This is how we learn, by copying, watching others, and then finding our own voice.
Here we have one of the most perfect specimens of the human brain.
See, it comes down to that question of the mirror problem. See, vampires can't see themselves in mirrors. And AI can't really see itself or reflect and see its own processes. It's not a mirror, it's a mirror of us. That's part of what's really freaking us out, is that all this knowledge and intelligence and attitudes and racism and whatever you want to put that comes out of AI comes from us. Our work, our ideas, synthesized and put together. So maybe what we fear, just like the vampire, we're fearing ourselves. And we're looking in the mirror and there's nothing staring back. And I think there's something to look into, but we got to stop looking for our own reflection, for a copy of what exists. AI is not a copy. See, AI has that dual challenge. It's the one sending us out to that brave new world, and it's the one sitting there saying, stop, this is gonna destroy us. It's gonna take jobs. This is it. I don't like it. Maybe what we fear about AI isn't that it's gonna replace us, is that it's going to accurately show us as we are. Our hunger for more, our thirst for immortality, and our need to be so much better than the other that we actually try to start competing with AI. And maybe the competition thing is the bug in the machine. And maybe we're asking the wrong questions about AI. After all, like good vampires, the best ideas live forever. And maybe, just maybe, that's what makes us human. And this might be the way to let our ideas and our voices be heard, not just swallowed up like AI as a vampire. Because neither vampires nor AI as a vampire is real. It's a technology and intelligence and a way that we're looking at ourselves that sometimes we don't like, and other times is the key to understanding of what we can become. The vampire metaphor isn't an accident. Both are showing us versions of ourselves we'd really not like to see, but they're also the capability to do something more with what we have and to move beyond where we are. And so, like Campbell would say, what makes AI so scary to us? Not the alien intelligence idea that we can't understand it. It's the fact that AI, like vampires, actually plays two roles that Campbell talks about human myths being built around. The famous one is the hero journey, right? Overcoming odds, going through things, change, bringing about a whole new world. AI represents that all over the place for the people who like it. AI represents the opposite for the people whose creativity was taken because they see it as a destroyer, not a builder of worlds. And AI, in Campbell's words, is also the threshold guardian. That's the guard at the door that watches out for us, that protects us. That's our survival instinct as human beings. From hunter-gatherers up to now, we used to paint these projections onto cave walls. Now we put them in AI without permission, and we're trying to put more stories out. That's the argument against AI data, is it's what we've already done, and it's just giving us back more of what we've already done.